Hey guys, tonight we're not stepping into the mind of a philosopher. We're stepping onto a battlefield, but not the kind with choreographed duels, slow-motion horse charges, or conveniently clean armor. No, tonight we dive into the real thing. Mud, confusion, panic, sweat, and steel. This is what actually happened in a medieval battle. You're ripped from sleep by a sound you'll never be able to describe properly. Half horn blast, half someone screaming the word march like he's owed money by the dawn. There's no gentle stirring, no warm bed to grumble in. You're on the ground, in armor, on dirt that's damp in the way that suggests it's not just rain. Your back aches like it borrowed pain from your ancestors. Every movement grinds metal against bone and regret. You try to stretch, but your chainmail clings to you like a vengeful ghost. And every other man around you is waking with the same crusted eyes and brittle groans. One guy has a boot full of slugs, another's using a wet helmet as a pillow. No one looks heroic. Breakfast is an insult in edible form. A crust of something that technically qualifies as bread, but might have doubled as a paving stone last Lent. You chew like your jaw's out of warranty, washing it down with something warm and fermented that claims to be ale. Because drinking water around here is basically rolling dice with your intestines. You haven't seen your own face in weeks, and the only thing you know for certain is it smells like betrayal. You splash some murky water on yourself out of ritual more than hygiene. Then it's time to strap into gear that smells like it survived a panic attack inside a latrine. Orders come down from someone on horseback. Someone whose boots have never known mud and who shouts with the confidence of a man who'll never carry his own pack. Form up. Move out. The men shuffle, groaning. Metal scrapes and rattles like a junkyard parade. Someone steps on a sharp rock barefoot and immediately curses existence. The mud grabs at your boots like it wants to drag you underground. You're not even in the fight yet, and already you feel like you've lost. But you march, not out of valor, out of obligation, fear, and the faint hope that staying behind won't mean a quiet rest, but a punishment involving blunt axes and missing fingers. One miserable squelch at a time, you trudge forward. The earth beneath your feet isn't earth anymore. It's a thick, sucking soup of rot and despair. It grips your feet with the malice of something that knows you'll be too tired to resist soon. You adjust a strap, fall half a step behind, and receive a look from the man behind you that promises death by spite. Armor pinches and rubs in ways that suggest it was never intended to be worn by something as soft and mortal as a human. Your thighs feel like they've entered into hostile negotiations with each other. You're not marching so much as being slowly steam-cooked inside a tin coffin. The smells hit you next. Livestock, sweat, onions, and terror. Somewhere ahead, someone loses a battle with last night's turnip stew and delivers a gaseous warning to everyone behind him. You try breathing through your mouth. Immediate regret. You pass a dead hedgehog, a broken cart, and something that might have once been a toe. No one stops. Stopping means you get shouted at. Not stopping means you get shouted at anyway. The sergeant is a man made of bark and bitterness. His voice is the only constant, yelling orders, yelling at people for not understanding the orders, and then yelling more when they do. Morale is theoretical. Some men sing, some mutter. One man screams wordlessly into the wind like a man trying to shout down the void. No one tells him to stop. It helps, somehow. You start to wonder if the enemy might surrender before you arrive. Then you remember they're probably thinking the same thing, which means, inevitably, that someone's going to panic, someone's going to swing, and then it'll be chaos. That's how it always starts. Eventually, a hill rises in the distance, because of course it does. No medieval battle ever takes place on a flat plain. Hills are where all the dying happens. One man slips on the slope and rolls down. No one helps. Honestly, he's lucky. At the summit, you reach what passes for a base camp. It's not a stronghold. It's a loose gathering of damp misery. There are tents, if you're nobility. The rest of you get a patch of wet ground slightly less cursed than the rest. You stake your spot by collapsing into it. The man next to you does the same. Without speaking, you've formed a trench community. The smell is immediate and aggressive. Wool, wet socks, cooked despair, and something suspicious near the food cart. Flies rise like confetti from hell. Some of them you recognize. You've named them. Sanitation is a pit in the ground. There's no privacy. The smell has achieved biblical status. Everyone pretends not to make eye contact. You've abandoned dignity like it was extra baggage. Then comes stew. A bowl is shoved into your hands. It's gray. That's not a metaphor. That's the actual color. You ask what's in it, and the cook stares at you in a way that promises trauma. You eat it anyway. You're starving, and at this point, whatever meat it used to be, you just hope it died quick. Men sit sharpening weapons that were probably farm tools a month ago. Others play dice. Some pray loudly and dramatically, more for show than salvation. You hear coughs, sobbing, the off-key wail of a battle hymn, and the clumsy attempt of someone trying to play a lute like it's an axe. A knight strides through the camp. He's polished. He smells like lavender. You hate him instantly. Night falls. You curl up in your damp cloak beside a man who snores like he's swallowing thunder. You try to sleep, but your mind plays a vivid slideshow of all the ways tomorrow could kill you. Then, just as you start to drift, a voice cuts through the dark. Form up at sunrise. Of course. Another beautiful morning awaits. Dawn doesn't break so much as it creeps in reluctantly, like even the sun isn't eager to see what happens next. You open your eyes to find your cloak soaked through, your limbs numb and your heart already tired. Somewhere in the distance, a trumpet blares with all the majesty of a sick goose. Around you, men groan and shift, each one performing the sacred ritual of pretending to be more motivated than the man next to him. You peel yourself off the ground and into a line that doesn't so much form as congeal. There's no rhyme or order, only the illusion of discipline. Everyone's trying to remember the choreography of war while still half asleep. Helmets go on backwards, shields are upside down. One man's got a pitchfork and the kind of wide-eyed confusion that suggests he might be in the wrong army altogether. Then he arrives. The noble commander. He gleams like a polished mirror, his armor so spotless it reflects your shame. He surveys the ragged mess in front of him like a disappointed father about to deliver a lecture no one asked for. He clears his throat, dramatically, of course. That's how you know a speech is coming. Men, he declares, in that theatrical tone only someone who's never dug a latrine uses. Today, we fight for glory. He pauses, expecting applause or maybe an angelic chorus. Instead, someone coughs up something medically concerning. For our king, our lands, our honor. The words float out over the ranks, where they're met with a vague mumble, mostly digestive discomfort mistaken for patriotism. He tells you to look to your brothers. So you do. The man beside you is trembling, his helmet still askew. His shield is bent, and his spear is more decoration than weapon. The commander tells you the enemy fears you. That's a bold claim, considering you're currently standing next to someone humming a lullaby while adjusting his chainmail. If you die today, he adds, you die as heroes. You swallow the urge to raise your hand and ask if dying as a baker was still an option. Then comes the part about God. Naturally, he's on your side. You're not sure he got the memo, but it's comforting to pretend. With a flourish, the commander raises his sword and bellows, "Forward!" The army hesitates, blinking in shared confusion. One man sneezes, another stares at his boots like they might mutiny. Eventually, a few brave souls shuffle forward and the rest follow. Not out of conviction, but because standing still means you might be noticed. and no one wants that. The formation begins, or at least that's the word they use. What actually forms is more of a loose cluster of individuals vaguely facing the same direction. The sergeant, who may have been a pig farmer 3 years ago, starts barking numbers. No one knows what they mean. Everyone nods anyway. First line, shields. Second line, pikes. You all do your best, despite the fact that the man in front of you is using his shield to scratch his back, and the guy to your left keeps poking people with a spear longer than his ambitions. Behind you, someone breathes like they've rehearsed their death scene in advance. You're not sure whether to comfort him or join in. Nearby, cavalry assembles. Majestic beasts in shining barding, mounted by knights who look like they were carved out of smugness. Their armor glistens. Your boots squelch. Their banners flutter. Your underwear hasn't dried since last Tuesday. There's a sudden shout, "Tighten the line," which is easier said than done when everyone's stepping on each other and the mud is doing its best to claim your feet as tribute. Your shield slips. Someone elbows you. You no longer have the emotional resources to care. That's when you hear it, the drum. A slow, deliberate beat that sounds like a funeral march, composed by someone with a cruel sense of timing. Around you, men whisper last-minute prayers. Make promises they won't live long enough to keep, or just cry. You lift your weapon with the grace of a man lifting his own headstone. And then, just as the line begins to resemble something marginally less embarrassing, the sound comes. It begins like a sigh in the sky, soft and far away. Then it swells. Not wind, not thunder, but something worse. Arrows, hundreds of them, released with terrifying enthusiasm. A voice yells, "Shields up!" and you obey with the reflex of someone who doesn't want to die with a stick through the lung. Not everyone is so fast. One man is still trying to figure out which end of his shield is the top. The sky goes dark, not with clouds, but with death. The arrows fall like hail from an angry god. You flinch, duck, curse, and try to become one with your shield. Beside you, a man takes an arrow to the shoulder and drops. Someone else yells something in Latin, or maybe he just sneezed. It's hard to tell in all the panic. Movies never show this part. Arrows don't dance. They crash. They thud. They punch through meat and bounce off bone. They splinter shields and splatter mud. One arrow skids across your own shield with a sound that makes you whimper. You give it a name. Gerald. You promise Gerald a long and meaningful friendship if it gets you through this. To your left, a man forgets to duck. To your right, someone screams that he's hit, though he looks suspiciously uninjured. Maybe he just wants out. Who can blame him? Then the second volley comes. Any illusion of bravery disintegrates. Veterans crouch like ghosts. New recruits collapse into puddles of pure dread. One man lies flat, pretending to be dead already. You respect the tactic. And then, finally, the arrows stop. You're alive. Gerald did his job, but now the true nightmare begins. Close combat. The part no one rehearses because there's no good way to practice madness. There's no countdown, no elegant signal, just a collective lurch forward, like everyone's being pulled by the same horrible magnet. You move, not out of heroism, but because the bodies behind you are pushing, and if you fall, you'll be a memory before your name finishes leaving someone's lips. And then it happens. Contact. It's not a clash, not a duel, not even a fight in the proper sense. It's a collision. You don't hit the enemy so much as merge with them in a chaos of limbs, steel, and screams. There's no elegant fencing, no choreographed swordplay. It's meat slamming into meat, metal on bone, sweat in your eyes, panic in your lungs. You swing your weapon, if it can even be called that. Maybe it's a sword, or an axe, or something that started life as a farm tool. You don't aim, you flail. You don't fight, you survive. Every sound is an assault, the crash of blades meeting shields, the splinter of broken wood, the guttural cries of men trying to convince themselves they're braver than they are. Someone near you is yelling, a rhythm of noise like a chant or a curse, and it's impossible to tell which. The fighting is so close, so personal, you can smell the man trying to kill you. He smells like onions and death. There is no such thing as personal space anymore. You are shoulder to shoulder with strangers who might be dead in seconds. Or you might be. It all depends on whose swing lands first. Your helmet fogs up. You can't see. You try to breathe and the air tastes like blood and fear. Someone bumps into you, hard, and your ribs explode in pain. You stumble sideways, barely catching yourself. There's blood on your gauntlet. Maybe yours, maybe not. It doesn't matter. A blade flashes toward your head. You duck, and it finds someone else. You lock eyes with the attacker for a moment, just long enough to silently agree. No hard feelings, just bad timing. You try to remember your training, but your mind gives you nothing. Just vague echoes of swing hard and don't die. So you swing again. Sometimes you hit something, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you hear the wet, unforgettable sound of impact. Sometimes there's silence, which is worse. Around you, men fall. Some scream, others go down quietly. You don't look. You can't look. Looking means seeing, and seeing means thinking, and thinking is too dangerous right now. This isn't a battle. It's a bar fight in a slaughterhouse. You step over someone who isn't moving. You don't know if he's dead or just pretending. That's a valid tactic. In fact, you start to wonder if it's the smart move. But before you can commit to cowardice, another shout rises above the din. Hold the line. You try. You really do. But the line is more of a suggestion at this point. Everyone is doing their own version of staying alive, and most of it looks like blind swinging and desperate footwork. The noise is overwhelming. Screams of pain, of rage, of confusion. One guy is shouting at a bush. Another is clearly attacking a tree. There are young men sobbing, old men roaring, and somewhere, unbelievably, someone is still trying to sing. You hear every kind of scream, shrill ones from the boys, deep ones from the veterans, and one high-pitched squeak from a guy who just realized he's on the wrong side and has been swinging at his own men. No one blames him. It's that kind of day. Weapons connect. Maces hit soft targets with a sound like a butcher slapping meat. Arrows whistle past your ears, always too close. A spear breaks through someone's armor, and the scream that follows sends a chill down your spine, even though you're already soaked in sweat. But the worst sounds, the ones you'll never forget, aren't the shouting or the steel. They're the wet ones. A boot stepping in something that used to be someone. The sickening squelch of blood and mud mixing underfoot. The sharp gasp of someone realizing too late that they're dying. These aren't sounds you can forget. They settle deep in your bones. You'll carry them longer than any scar. You hear a hoarse scream. It's a terrible sound, high and animal, and full of terror. A man nearby cries for his mother. Another man is laughing, not in joy, but in the kind of broken way that suggests something inside him has come loose. Through it all, your ears begin to ring. Not from a blow, just from sheer overload. You start moving on instinct. Swing, block, duck, swing again. Your body keeps going because your brain has left the building. There is no end to it, no cinematic finale, no moment of clarity where everything slows down and you get to say something meaningful before falling. Most deaths here are anonymous. Fast, from behind, from the side, from someone who doesn't even know your name. Maybe even from someone on your own side who panicked and swung wide. The battlefield is not a stage, it's a mosh pit of panic where mistakes are fatal and names are a luxury. You're fighting, then you're falling, not dramatically, just down. Maybe someone shoved you, maybe you tripped, Maybe it was a severed limb or a slick of blood or your own failing knees. Whatever the cause, the result is the same. Your face meets mud. Your shield slips. The sounds around you grow louder, more distant, and you suddenly have a decision to make. Get up and risk a spear in the gut, or stay down and risk being trampled. You have 3 seconds to decide. 3, 2, 1. You lie still, not because it's safe, but because moving feels like the most dangerous thing you could do. You can't tell what's happening above you anymore. The battle has folded over itself, a shrieking, clanging, stomping mess of iron and fear, and you've become part of the floor. Someone stumbles over you. Someone else might have stepped on your hand. You don't cry out. You don't even breathe deep. You just press your face into the filth and pretend to be something unremarkable. A body, a shape, nothing worth noticing. This is now a test of patience, of silence, of convincing your own heartbeat to quiet down before it gives you away. Around you, the storm continues. Steel meets flesh. Men groan, yell, pray, and die. Someone drops beside you. You don't look. You don't want to know if he's alive or just better at playing dead than you are. Above you, hooves slam the ground with the fury of thunder. A war horse gallops through the carnage, uncaring about where it lands, and if you're unlucky, it lands on you. A man screams. A short, awful burst, and then nothing. Someone else shouts for help. Another answers with steel. You try to disappear even further into the mud. There's a chance, slim and ridiculous, that lying still might save your life, but it's not guaranteed. Looters will come. They'll poke bodies, flip them over, check for valuables. If they think you're alive, they might finish the job themselves. Not out of cruelty, just efficiency. They don't want company. They want boots, pouches, coins, anything that isn't nailed down. If you flinch, if you breathe too loudly, they'll decide for you which side of the line you're on, so you hold still. You listen to the battle shift. The noise doesn't stop. It mutates. It changes from the sharp tempo of combat to the dragging, uneven rhythm of aftermath. Less shouting. More groaning. Fewer strikes. More breathing. You lift your head just slightly. The air stinks of blood and fire, of fear and something else. Something worse. Something final. Eventually, the sounds fade. Not because peace has returned, but because exhaustion has conquered everyone. You roll over, coated in filth and silence. You survived. Somehow. For now. No one cheers. No one notices. There is no fanfare for the man who played dead well enough to avoid becoming one of the real ones. You rise, careful, cautious, scanning for movement. There's none. Just the battlefield, ugly and uneven, littered with bodies and broken things. You're one of the lucky ones. And it doesn't feel like luck at all. The battle is over. Not because anyone declared it so, but because the chaos has run out of momentum. The shouting has dwindled to the occasional cry. The ring of blades is gone, replaced by the slow, dragging scrape of men trying to stand or crawl. You blink, dazed. Your legs ache. Your hands shake. Your armor feels heavier now, as if the weight of survival is denser than fear. All around, the field is a graveyard in the making. Bodies lie twisted and wrong, sprawled across the mud like discarded dolls. Some still move, groaning. Others are silent. Weapons are scattered. A severed boot rests absurdly on top of a rock, as though someone placed it there with ceremony. You take a step and almost fall. Your foot slips in something you don't examine. Someone nearby mumbles, "We won." It doesn't sound like victory. It sounds like surrender. Another man yells, "Victory," while clutching his arm, which is hanging on by a thread. You nod, because technically, yes, you're still breathing, mostly intact, and not currently on fire. In this war, that's what passes for triumph. You stumble toward what's left of camp. The path back is lined with reminders. Men who didn't make it, gear no one wants to claim, and a silence that feels too loud. Your commander is already talking again, voice raised as if the words matter now. Something about bravery, honor, duty. You don't hear it. You don't care. Your ears still ring from the screams. You think about the men who didn't get up. You think about your feet, one of which might be broken. You think about stew and immediately regret it, but you're alive. That's the only thing that counts now. You drop onto a rock and breathe, the kind of breath that tastes like rust and relief. You whisper the words every survivor whispers every single time. Never again. Then, from the edge of camp, a voice calls for the next march. Another skirmish, next week. Of course, after the swords are sheathed and the groans replace the war cries, the worst part begins. Not the fighting, the cleanup. You'd think the aftermath would be calm, maybe even reverent. Some kind of respectful tending to the wounded, burying the dead, mourning what's been lost. But it's not that. Not even close. What follows a medieval battle is less a moment of reflection and more a grim routine made of haste, hunger, and horror. You don't mourn, you scavenge. First come the medics, if you can call them that. They're not doctors. They're men with knives, thick fingers, poor eyesight, and a few horrifying catchphrases like, "That's got to come off," or "Bite on this stick." If you're lucky, your wound is shallow. If you're not, the man treating you drinks the wine meant for cleaning it and shrugs before grabbing a saw. There's no anesthesia, only distraction. The pain is not reduced. It's shared. You sit, thigh split from a blade, staring at a needle that was sterilized by being waved over a candle. The barber surgeon, who also happens to be the man who trimmed your hair once, mutters something about infection and hoping for the best. You scream, loudly. No one blames you. No one helps. Screaming is just part of the soundtrack now. Around you, bodies are dragged. Some are handled with care. Most aren't. They're tossed into piles, partially covered by rags or cloaks or nothing at all. The smell is no longer something your brain can ignore. It rises from the ground, thick and biblical, attracting flies so numerous you can hear them. A constant, buzzing cloud of winged indifference. One lands on your wound. You swat it away. That may be the cleanest interaction you have all day. Meanwhile, the living begin their second job, looting. No one calls it that, of course. They say salvaging equipment or gathering resources. But it's looting. Men move from body to body, checking pouches, removing boots, slipping rings off cold fingers. You join in. Not because you want to, because you need new boots. Yours are soaked through, and Gregor, bless his heart, doesn't need his anymore. Some men dig graves. Shallow, hurried things that will be half erased by rain by morning. Others pile corpses and light them afire. The smell becomes a new kind of wrong. One soldier sits on a rock with a javelin still in his arm, staring at nothing, unwilling to move. You ask if he needs help. He says no. "It's mine now," he mutters. You leave him alone. Bandages are applied. They fall off minutes later. Some wounds reopen, others fester on sight. The word amputation is spoken more than once. No one says recovery. No one expects it. You sit by a fire and try to clean your weapon. It's not rusted. It's blood. You scrub at it with your own shirt, which is already soaked with things you'd rather not name. Around you, men are coughing, crying, praying. One is trying to sing, but no one joins in. The tune is wrong, and so is everything else. When night falls, the air grows colder, and the stench settles in like a thick blanket. You limp back to your patch of dirt, hoping it's still yours. It is. No one wants it. You collapse. too tired to speak, too sore to sleep. A man nearby is whispering to a god you don't recognize. Another is muttering, next time, as if that promise has weight. You know there will be a next time. There's always a next time. The cook ladles out something that might be food. You take it without question. It's warm. That's enough. It has the texture of boiled regret and the color of secrets. You eat it because there's no pride left in you. That was trampled sometime between the fifth volley of arrows and the moment you saw a man flattened by his own war horse. You try to sleep. You don't. The man beside you snores like an avalanche falling through a church. You shift positions again and again, each one worse than the last. The mud finds new ways to enter your clothes. Your bruises complain with every movement. The stars look down without comment. You stare at them and wonder what you did in a past life to deserve this one. Every few minutes, someone limps back into camp. They drag weapons behind them. They say nothing. Their eyes are hollow. One looks like he's aged 10 years in a day. The commander walks through camp as if inspecting the damage, pretending to care. His armor still gleams. He hasn't bled. You hate him a little more than you did this morning. And still, you're alive. Your body is one enormous bruise. Your hands shake. Your head feels like it's been stuffed with smoke and sawdust. But you're breathing. In medieval warfare, that's a minor miracle. This is what passes for rest. Tomorrow might bring another march, another ambush, another hill to die on. But tonight there is a fire, a bowl of mystery stew, in the company of other men who know, without speaking, that all your stories will soon become lies. Not because you're dishonest, but because the truth is too much. Too heavy. Too raw. So you'll lie a little. For survival. Later that night, after the moans of the wounded fade into the new silence of exhaustion, the real aftermath begins. Not the battle. Not the victory. The part where everything that's broken must be put away. Or buried. Or burned. You might imagine this phase to be sacred, full of ceremony or respect. You'd be wrong. What happens after a medieval battle is more logistics than legacy. It's not about honor. It's about getting through it. Some men sit dazed beside the fires, blades in their laps, cleaning them with whatever fabric is closest. Sometimes their own shirts, still clinging to their ribs. Others stagger around the camp, searching for bandages, for wine, for someone they lost. A few just sit and stare at nothing in particular. They've seen too much. Their brains are still back on the field, stuck in the moment of impact, in the shriek of a dying horse or the sound of a rib snapping under a boot. The cook is still trying to pretend it's a normal night. He ladles out something that looks like it was scraped off the underside of a cart. You approach. He doesn't look at you. You don't ask what it is. That would only make it worse. You take your bowl of sadness and sit in the mud. It's warm. It's enough. It tastes like salt, ash, and apology. You eat every bite. Hunger's more powerful than disgust now. Around the camp, men are pretending to recover. Some sing badly. Others whisper to gods they ignored yesterday. There's a man nearby patching a sleeve with one hand, while the other still trembles from adrenaline. Another has made peace with a wound he hasn't acknowledged yet. You can see it in the way he keeps glancing at his side, trying to decide if the warmth spreading down his leg is blood or something worse. The commander strolls through camp again, polished as ever, untouched by the fight. He wears a face of concern that's so poorly acted it hurts. You try not to look at him. You know if you do, you'll hate him more than you already do Han. And that's a lot. He's already talking about the next move. Another skirmish, another march, another glorious opportunity to lose another chunk of yourself in the mud. You lie down again on the same patch of wet earth, curling into your cloak like it might protect you from memory. You try to sleep. You fail. Your eyes stay open, staring into the flickering shadows thrown by the fire, each one reminding you of a man who didn't make it back. Some snores rise around you, heavy and unbothered. Others whimper in their sleep, lost in dreams that probably look a lot like what happened a few hours ago. Somewhere, someone starts telling a story, a real one, or at least it used to be. But the words are already changing. The part where he tripped and screamed, that's becoming a clever distraction maneuver. The moment he begged a squire to hold his hand during the arrow storm. Now he was protecting the boy from panicking. Everyone listens. No one calls him out, because everyone here is doing the same thing, turning horror into heroism, trauma into tale. It's not about ego, it's about survival. If you can laugh at it, maybe it won't haunt you. If you can tell the story well enough, maybe it'll replace the real one. Maybe the part where your friend died won't be the thing you see every time you blink. Maybe you'll remember the laughter more than the scream. A lute plays somewhere, missing 2 strings. The tune is off-key and nobody cares. A woman hums as she patches a cloak. Children, the camp followers' children, sleep nearby as if none of it happened. And for a moment, the world contracts. There is no battlefield, no hill of corpses, no spear that missed you by an inch. There is only the fire, the stories, and the small miracle of being here. And in the back of your mind, the quiet, lingering thought returns. You lived through it. Barely. Accidentally, miraculously. By morning, the lies are already setting in. No one means harm by them. They're not told to deceive. They're told to survive. Around the embers of what used to be a fire, men sit wrapped in cloaks and bravado. The ground is still soft with blood and ash, but the stories are starting. Someone says he took down 6 armored knights with nothing but a frying pan. Another claims he caught an arrow mid-flight and threw it back. A third insists he fought a war elephant in the middle of France. No one argues. Everyone nods. It's easier that way. You find yourself chiming in too. The part where you slipped on a corpse and screamed. That becomes a tactical withdrawal. When you crawled behind a shrub to avoid the cavalry. Now it's a stealth maneuver. You leave out the part where you begged a squire to hold your hand during the arrow storm. Everyone here is doing the same, turning terror into legend, reshaping memories into something bearable. It isn't vanity, it's survival. If you can laugh at it, maybe it didn't break you. If you can turn it into a tale, maybe it won't haunt your sleep. And as you speak, your voice steadies. You start to believe your own version, not because it's true, but because it's kinder. Nearby, someone's roasting meat. It smells vaguely like rat, and no one wants to know. They eat it anyway. A few men chuckle dryly. A lute plays a broken melody. It's out of tune, missing strings, and still the most music anyone's heard in days. A woman, a camp follower, hums as she stitches a torn sleeve. Her voice is soft, steady, like a lullaby for people too old to be comforted. You stare into the flames and think, you made it, barely, accidentally, miraculously. Soon, you'll be called away again, to another skirmish. Another muddy field, another line to hold or pretend to, but for now, there's warmth, there's bread, there's the quiet bond of men who all know exactly how much of each other's stories are false, because theirs are too. And for one night, one flickering stretch of time carved out of violence and exhaustion, that's enough. Long before stone walls snaked across the mountains of northern China, before battlements and towers loomed against the sky, the land was a patchwork of ambition and fear. There was no singular wall, no unified defense. Instead, there were kingdoms, 7 of them, each clawing at the others like wolves in a pen too small for peace. This was the Warring States period, a time when power was fragile and borders were temporary. Each state built its own fortifications, not as grand visions of unity, but as stubborn declarations. This is mine. Try and take it. These early barriers weren't monuments, They were desperation made visible. Tamped earth stacked by peasants and prisoners, layered with brush, mud and timber, barely held together by labor and haste. No emperor commanded these constructions. No map connected them. They weren't part of a strategy. They were pleas, shouts, curses in the dirt. And yet, they were the seeds of something greater. Because while rival states fought each other, their eyes always drifted north. Beyond the rivers and fields lay the steppe, vast, cold and silent, until it wasn't. Until the Xiongnu came. They were not armies in the traditional sense. They were wind-borne raiders on horseback, riding like shadows, vanishing before arrows could be loosed. They didn't come to conquer cities. They came for livestock, for supplies, for fire, and when they rode away, they left scorched villages and silence in their wake. The fear they stirred was not theatrical. It was existential. It was the kind of fear that made kings build with anything they could find, praying that earth and brush could hold back thunder. Tens of thousands were conscripted, not to fight, but to build. The walls they raised stretched for miles, bending with the hills and vanishing into forests. They weren't elegant. They weren't beautiful. They were labor, endless labor, and they crumbled as easily as they were made. Time, weather, and neglect conspired against them. Still, the building continued. Because even a wall that fails sends a message. We will not run, we will resist. But all of it, the scattered barriers, the isolated projects, were nothing more than fragments. The idea of a single, massive wall wasn't yet born. That would require something even more dangerous than an enemy on horseback. It would take a man who wanted to rule forever. In the year 221 BCE, after centuries of chaos and bloodshed, that man emerged. His name was Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. He didn't inherit a country. He forged one, with iron, fear, and law. And once he had it, he turned his eyes north, not to explore, not to negotiate, but to seal the horizon with stone. He ordered the walls of the old kingdoms to be linked, expanded, and reborn. What was once a patchwork would now be a spine, a single barrier stretching across the land like a blade held against the throat of the wilderness. This wasn't construction, this was empire made solid. And so it began. The emperor did not merely order a wall. He demanded a transformation of the land itself. Qin Shi Huang, the man who had conquered all under heaven, was not content with power measured in armies or scrolls. He wanted something permanent, something eternal, a scar of intention across the northern wilderness. The fragmented ramparts of the warring states were no longer enough. They would be torn down, rebuilt, and bound together. Not as a patchwork, but as a single spine of control. This was not maintenance. This was reinvention on an imperial scale. Tens of thousands were summoned, then hundreds of thousands. Soldiers, peasants, criminals, and scholars who had angered the wrong official. None were spared. The labor camps stretched from mountain pass to desert plain. Men built because they were told to, and they died because no one cared if they didn't make it home. The wall was long, yes, but longer still were the graves beneath it. People called it the longest cemetery on earth. Not as poetry, as fact. The materials were harsh, the tools primitive. Most of the wall wasn't made of the stone we picture today. It was dirt, rammed earth. Massive wooden frames were filled with layers of packed soil and gravel, pounded down by foot and hammer. Where there was stone, it was dragged by hand, hauled by teams over treacherous terrain. Everything was carried, every log, every bucket, every life. Still, the wall rose. It wasn't just a barrier. It was a symbol, a warning, a line between order and chaos. And it wasn't built merely to stop the northern tribes, though that's what the records claimed. It was built to remind the people, all people, that the emperor's reach had no end. The wall didn't just mark the edge of the empire, it was the edge of the emperor's will. And while the wall grew, so did his vision. Qin Shi Huang standardized weights and measures. He unified the script. He paved roads, imposed laws, and hunted whispers of dissent with a scholar's precision and a tyrant's fury. Everything, the roads, the rules, the punishments, was part of a single idea, that China would never again fall into chaos, that it would become a machine, ordered, eternal. The original wall he built was nothing like the sweeping stone monument we imagine today. It was rough, brutal, and in places, temporary. But it was the first, the beginning of something larger than any one man, even the emperor who dreamed it. And when he died, entombed in a mausoleum guarded by thousands of terracotta soldiers, his wall remained. Winds battered it, time cracked it, but it did not vanish, because the idea behind it was too powerful to fade. And as the Qin dynasty crumbled, the next great empire rose from the dust, the Han, and with it came a new generation of rulers who looked northward, saw the same horizon, and came to the same conclusion. The wall must endure. The Qin dynasty, for all its ruthless ambition, was short-lived. Its emperor's quest for immortality ended not with eternal rule, but with revolt, collapse, and a swift unraveling of his grand design. Yet not everything perished with him. His dream of a unified China persisted, and so did his wall. When the Han dynasty emerged from the ashes, they saw the crumbling ramparts not as ruins, but as inheritance. The Han emperors knew what every ruler before them had learned the hard way. China's northern frontier was not a line you drew and forgot. It was a living wound, always threatening to reopen. The nomadic Xiongnu tribes, swift, cunning, born of the saddle, still thundered across the steppes, their arrows just as sharp, their raids just as relentless. And so, the Han chose not to abandon the wall, but to build upon it, not just in structure, but in purpose. Under Emperor Wu of Han, the wall ceased to be a scattered defense and became a system, a military network stretched across mountains, valleys, and deserts. Where the Qin had used dirt, the Han began to use stone, brick, and more advanced techniques. They built garrisons and watchtowers, dug wells, stored grain, and stationed soldiers who became as much farmers as fighters. The wall was no longer just a thing to keep enemies out. It was now a way to keep China in. Signal towers were added, spaced like punctuation across the horizon. Fires lit by day, smoke by night. A warning could leap across hundreds of miles in a matter of hours, faster than any rider, faster than any letter. This wasn't just engineering. It was strategy. It was logistics carved into the earth. The wall had become a kind of artery, pumping news, troops, and supplies across the empire's exposed flank. And yet, it wasn't just a military line. It was a place people lived. Thousands of soldiers were posted along the frontier, often for years. With them came families, merchants, and laborers. Tiny outposts became towns. A society emerged, isolated, harsh, but loyal. These men weren't elites. They were farmers in armor, hardened by wind and loneliness. They tilled small gardens between patrols. They patched their own roofs. Their children learned to walk in the shadow of battlements. And beneath this life of mud and duty, something else happened. Something quieter, more human. The frontier became a place of contact. Han Chinese and nomadic tribes didn't just clash. They traded, they talked. Sometimes they married. In the spaces between towers and trenches, cultures bled into one another, subtly, steadily. By the end of the Han era, the wall was more than a barrier. It was a symbol of presence, an empire's way of saying, "We are still here." Even as the dynasty weakened, even as politics soured and warlords rose, the wall endured, not just in form, but in idea. It stood against the wind, against the raids, and, increasingly, against the inevitability of collapse. Because no wall can hold forever, and no dynasty lasts without end. Soon the Han too would fall, and the wall, like the empire it protected, would begin to fade. When the Han dynasty finally crumbled, it wasn't a single collapse, but a long, uneven disintegration, the kind that rots from within before the walls even notice. China fractured again. Warlords carved the land into territories like meat from a bone, each more concerned with their rivals than with the wild spaces beyond. In this chaos, the Great Wall no longer had a champion. No central empire remained to tend its wounds, and so it began to vanish. Not all at once, but slowly, piece by piece. Watchtowers fell into ruin, garrisons were abandoned. The fire signals went dark. In some places, the wall was swallowed by sand. In others, by vines. Stones were taken, brick by brick, to build homes and temples, repurposed by villagers who no longer saw it as sacred. The earth walls of the Qin cracked and crumbled under rain. The Han reinforcements broke beneath years of silence. Without soldiers to defend it or emperors to fund it, the Great Wall became something else, a fading line across memory. Yet the threats it had guarded against never truly disappeared. New powers rose on the steppes, the Xianbei, the Ruran, the Gokturks, tribes who brought fresh danger and new waves of conflict. Some of them would eventually settle within China's borders, carving out kingdoms of their own, blurring the lines between outsider and citizen. The wall no longer divided civilization from the unknown. Now, it stood amid a shifting map of allegiances, alliances, and betrayals. In this age of disunity, the wall became less a shield and more a resource. Warlords used what remained of it however they could. Some reinforced their sections with new stone and fresh guards. Others mined the old wall for construction materials, cannibalizing the bones of dead dynasties. Fortresses rose from fallen watchtowers. Homes were built from defensive ramparts. What had once stood against the wild now supported roofs and walls in villages that no longer remembered what it had been built for. And yet, even in decay, the idea of the wall lingered. Poets wrote of it, not as an active defense, but as a symbol of sorrow and exile. In their verses, the northern frontier became a place where forgotten men went to fade, where wind howled across empty towers, and where the scent of old battles still clung to the stone. The wall was not romanticized as glorious. It was mourned. It had become the edge of loneliness, but ideas, like walls, have a way of waiting. And centuries later, when China rose once more beneath a new dynasty, forged not from tradition but from revolt, the wall would be remembered, not as it had been, but as it could be. The Mongols had come and gone. Their reign had burned itself across the land. When the Ming took power, they looked north and felt a cold echo of history whisper, "Never again." And so the wall would rise once more. By the time the Ming dynasty seized power in 1368, China was a land scarred by invasion, rebellion, and the long shadow of Mongol rule. The trauma of nearly a century under the Yuan dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan, son of the steppe, was still fresh in the minds of the people. The Mongols hadn't just ruled, they had galloped across the northern frontier like a storm, rewriting borders and burning certainties. When the Ming rose, they did so not merely with ambition, but with memory. And that memory demanded a wall. Not the patched dirt mounds of the Qin, not the winding earthworks of the Han. Something greater, something that would last. The Ming Wall was a response not to theory, but to terror. It wasn't symbolic. It was stone, brick, mortar, sweat. This wasn't a hasty project assembled under pressure. It was a deliberate act of permanence, one that stretched across mountains and deserts and cliffs, valleys and shadowed passes. And it was built with one goal: never again. The work began slowly, piecemeal, during the late 1400s. But it accelerated under generals like Qi Guang, men who had seen the devastation of Mongol raids firsthand and who knew that fire alone wouldn't hold the frontier. Under their guidance, the Ming transformed the wall into a living system of defense. No longer just a line, but a structure, a network, a civilization perched along the edge of wilderness. They quarried stone, fired bricks in kilns by the millions, and poured everything into construction. Ramparts were fortified. Drainage systems were built into the foundations to survive storms. Beacon towers rose at regular intervals, with codes of smoke by day and fire by night. Signals could now leap across the northern border faster than any horse. The Ming didn't just build. They planned, they calculated, and behind the parapets they settled people. Garrison towns were constructed along the wall's length, filled with soldiers, farmers, merchants, and administrators. Families were born in the shadow of battlements. Children learned to walk atop stone meant to repel war. Soldiers didn't merely stand guard. They farmed, traded, and formed a strange, sturdy society tied to the rhythm of the wall. It became a line not only between China and its enemies, but between ordinary life and a state of constant readiness. This was the wall we think of today. Massive, winding, iconic. In places, it stretched wide enough for horse carts to ride side by side. In others, it scaled mountain ridges like a dragon made of brick. It wrapped around the northern spine of the empire, a ribbon of resolve. But for all its strength, it was still a wall, not a force of nature. And walls, no matter how well built, still require men. Men who were tired, underpaid, isolated. As time wore on, corruption seeped into the cracks. Some guards began working with the very nomads they were meant to repel. Bribes were taken, gates were left ajar, and when the Manchus came, they did not scale the walls. They were invited in. But before the fall, before the betrayal and the dynastic shift, the Ming had done something extraordinary. They had taken a fading idea and carved it into stone. They had turned myth into monument, and for a time they had made the Great Wall truly great. For all its towering strength and imperial pride, the Great Wall was not a throne or a monument. It was a place people lived, day after day, year after year, often forgotten by the empire it was built to protect. Along its vast spine of brick and stone, thousands of men stood guard, but they weren't warriors of legend or marble statues in gleaming armor. They were farmers in uniform, exiles, convicts, men who had traded freedom or lost it for a place behind the battlements. Life on the wall during the Ming dynasty was not one of glory. It was routine, monotony, and cold, always cold. The garrison towns, scattered like beads on a thread across the northern border, were built to support this strange frontier society. Fortified barracks, small plots of farmland, dusty streets lined with cooking fires and drying boots, and always, just beyond, the endless horizon, the wilderness that never stopped watching. Every day followed a rhythm that dulled the senses: patrol the wall, check the watchtowers, haul stone, mend bricks loosened by weather or time, replace torches, clean weapons, drill, eat, wait, repeat. The wall may have been made of stone, but it required constant care. Mortar cracked, stones shifted, wind stripped everything not nailed down. When sandstorms rose from the west or blizzards howled from the north, it was the men, not the bricks, who stood exposed. There were no holidays, only rotations, no celebrations, only survival. And yet, amid the hardship, a strange sort of life endured. Soldiers raised families. Children were born in outposts hundreds of miles from the capital. Merchants visited with silk, tobacco, and news. Occasionally, peace prevailed long enough for trade to blossom. Furs, livestock, and tools crossing the border in quiet exchanges with nomadic tribes. Sometimes hostility softened into curiosity. Sometimes it hardened into raids. Food was basic: beans, millet, salted meat if supplies hadn't been intercepted, vegetables if you could coax them from the rocky soil. When a supply chain failed, when a caravan was hit or a bureaucrat grew careless, it didn't mean inconvenience. It meant hunger. Disease crept through the camps with ease. Water froze in the mornings. Fires died at night. Morale was as fragile as dry wood. And yet they stayed. Some served for duty, others because they had no choice. A few had been sentenced there, exile with a view, but most, the vast majority, were simply men who had been born into a job no one else wanted to do. They manned the edge of the world not for honor or praise, but because someone had to. The most isolated posts were the beacon towers, lone structures miles from the nearest outpost, where 2 or 3 men might stand watch for weeks without seeing another soul. Their job was to stare at the horizon, day after day. If they saw smoke or movement, anything suspicious, they would light their own signal, passing the alarm down the chain in a burst of flame and meaning. It was a simple job, and a terrifying one. The wall was not just between China and the steppe. It was between civilization and the unknown, between what was ordered and what was wild, between what could be controlled and what never could. And for those who lived upon it, the wall was not a monument. It was a home, a burden, a sentence, and sometimes a coffin.